We're live. Hello, everybody. It's Thursday. Time for our weekly Anchore open source gardening session. My name's Dan, and today we've got Keith, we've got Will, we've got Alex. We're the Anchore open source engineering team, and over here we work on open source tools that are generally used to inspect all sorts of different types of software, whether it's container images or source code repos or even file systems and archives. Figure out what that software is, generate software bill of materials and various types of standard formats, and then fundamentally we offer a perspective where we use that information to provide then higher level security, compliance, and insight functions like vulnerability scanning and license policy applications, all sorts of interesting stuff. Typically in these sessions, we'll go through our open source projects, Syft, Grype, Grant, a number of other projects that we've got, and go through any open issues, things that have been tagged needs discussion, and any particular topics that come up from the community on our various other community forums and communication venues. So let's get started. I thought we'd start. Typically, we'll go through, like I said, some of these needs discussion labels on issues and PRs, but I think today there may have been one Alex you'd highlighted of particular interest. We can start there. If anyone else here would like to start with a different ticket, just let me know. We can kick it off.
Oh yeah. The one I had was I wasn't this one. It was I put it in the chat actually. It's Grype 3023. Unless there something on this one that you're talking about.
No, I may have just copied the wrong link. I was trying to snarf it from 3023. Here we go. This one.
Yeah. So this is and this one's related to a Syft PR that's also referenced in the additional context section, that description. Actually, maybe a good place to start is that Syft PR down at the bottom, that additional context. I created this issue from that, but okay. It started with this. So Alan put in a PR for being able to catalog CS project files for .NET C# projects. I think the interesting thing here, and this is common with most languages and frameworks, like you have a way to describe what libraries that you want, and it's not pinned. It's like I have a very wide range of libraries, and that's so like the application can make the decision later after the tooling in question can then download and then pin what you're using. So the CS project file is more of a manifest. It's a range of valid versions. And so that's a bit of an impediment for being able to catalog dependencies from this file, but we want to be able to at least capture what's there. We have something like this. We have a Python cataloger that that looks at requirements TXT files. It has the same problem. You can specify ranges in there. So what we did then is we said, well, let's catalog what is pinned in that file. And there's a switch that says guess, I forget the specific switches, but it essentially pins to the lowest version of a range whenever there is a range. But this is, I'm kind of bringing this up for a topic for discussion because maybe we can go a different direction here. Maybe the direction we can go in is instead of trying to guess anything about a range, we could just capture the range itself as a first class thing. So we're used to capturing a package name, package version, but now moving forward, maybe we can, for things like this, things that are manifest, intent to install software, it's not necessarily a pinned thing yet, being able to say, hey, I've got an SBOM that has describes a package of these ranges. And that would be helpful downstream in vuln scanning so that it would at least be something. And so no longer is it going to be like in these cases where it'd be a single version checking to see if it's within a range, it's just seeing if those two ranges overlap. A little different, but still helpful. Anyway, I'll pause there. That's the context. I don't know what folks think about it so far.
I had one specific thought, which is would we put these version ranges in the version field in the SBOM, or would it be somewhere else? Because if we put them in the version field, I think that would become fairly problematic for a lot of other tooling that is very likely to be looking for a specific version. And if we were to add this, I think it's a great thing to add, but I think it would make most sense to be separate from a speculated version in the packages.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because it would break old Grype, right? Because Grype currently looks at the version and is like, is this Semver? Is this is this a gem version? And it'd be like, well, Semver doesn't start with a caret and fall back to the like very not preferred comparison algorithms. So yeah, I think definitely needs to be a new field in the SBOM. But I also think it's a really good idea to like not not lose packages. Like if we're scanning, if you're scanning an image, you sort of just assume like that everything got resolved to a particular thing, right? Like whatever build process downloaded a version of the package. But if you're scanning a source tree, you'll often just have a package name, or a package name and a more than 9, less than 10 kind of constraint. So I think and I think right now some of those packages get dropped in like requirements.txt. I think currently Syft says a package is a name and a version. If I don't at least have a name and a version, I don't really have package. So this would sort of relax that to be a name and a version range. Yeah. And then I think the matching side will be kind of interesting, because like we end up with like, instead of just match, we have like the ranges can theoretically intersect. But we don't know, like, because people can put anything they want in a version of their package. We don't know, like, for example, you could imagine that Syft finds a version range that's like, I don't know, 190 to 20 or something, but there aren't any packages in that range. Like nobody actually ever pushed 194. It would theoretically be vulnerable if they had, but that package doesn't exist in the world. So the range intersect is an interesting like quasi vulnerable, right? We're saying the like affected package handle has a range, and the this package has a version constraint range, and there's a couple things. There's like, because it's like range operations, but it's not strictly like on floats or ints or something. It's like range operations on fuzzy strings. There's a number of interesting like failure modes. Like we could try to say like, this is definitely vulnerable because the like possible package range is like a subset of the affected package range. Or this is probably not vulnerable because they're like disjoint, or like they intersect for some values, right? So like a valid package manager could look at this constraint and get you a vulnerable version, which I think we would have to report as vulnerable. But the great PR would be interesting. Especially because we can sort of tell, at least for many version types, that there's theoretically an intersecting range, but we don't know whether anyone actually published anything in that range. So anyway, yeah, it's a cool, and I'll let Keith go. Go ahead, Keith.
Well, another interesting facet to that is that some ecosystems allow multiple ranges to be specified. And then even within that, the operators, I think, potentially could mean different things, right? Like a pretty common thing, for example, in NPM is to put the caret operator. And that sort of means, if memory serves, like, only upgrade the patch version, or only upgrade the minor version depending on what I've specified for the rest of the version range. And so, maybe that gives us an implicit upper bound, which is, we could maybe report that as well. But, I think it would be important to think about trying to normalize it into some sort of structure that, makes sense across all the different ecosystems that we want to try to support here.
Yeah, like today we're capturing like the package, the package type, and we infer in Grype like the format. So that's where, so the version package over in Grype where we say, when I see this package type, that means this particular format. It'd be kind of like I think the right place to kind of encode that, carrot in this ecosystem means this as opposed to that kind of semantics.
Well, I was thinking it might make sense. Like, yeah, we need somewhere because we're parsing a package JSON or a requirements TXT or whatever. So Syft needs to be aware of the like ecosystem specific package manager rules. Like, what is a well-defined, what is this pipe compliant pip implementation allowed to do when it encounters this constraint? But we might want to do some internal normalization, right? So where Grype doesn't know as much about that, and Grype just only supports, less than or equal to. Even then, we might not be able to do that. And there's some.
I'm torn on that one because Grype already has to know about that kind of stuff anyway.
Yeah.
To a degree, so.
Right.
I'd go either way there.
I had one other question about this is, where is the right place to put this information? And I ask this because if I'm thinking about this from the object model that I would expect to see, it's really on the relationship and it's not on the package itself, because you have one package that's your main thing that you define some dependencies in. The dependency package is something that it gets resolved to a version, but the relationship to it is really the thing that you said, I want this version range. And there could be multiple things pointing to that same package with different version ranges potentially that they're trying to specify.
Yeah, I mean, I also wanted to talk about like the ontology of this too, because I'm a little stuck, and I think that's one of the biggest problems of this question, because I agree with the first thing that was brought up at the kind of top of this discussion, which is, hey, let's not overload the version field. The version field means point version, and if you make it mean something else, it's a implicit breaking change, and it's confusing, and you're no longer separable. You can't easily detect when something is a point version versus a range. Like you could do some heuristics, you probably make it work, but it's not ideal. So ontology-wise, I think you want to separate those out. And what comes up to me is, well, if I break it out and say I have a version range field, or I have versions as a field, which would probably be bad. But so I have a separate field. How does that encode a Cyclone DX and SPDX? Right. SPDX doesn't actually say you can't describe multiple versions. Cyclone does, I think.
I was actually going to make that dot connect because on the last live stream, or maybe the one before, there was that issue where the GitHub dependency or the GitHub SBOM that a user was downloading had a semver caret version, right? Because it's against source code, and so it was like, that's interesting because it didn't work, right? With Grype, and so there is some precedence for this type of material being overloaded in it, and for it to cause ambiguous problems.
And that's why this kind of circles back to what Keith was saying in terms of like, well, wait a second, if this is encoded on the edge, that eliminates the field problem. Like, in other words, how would we encode this if we were to go to SPDX and Cyclone if it's not allowed? If we're saying, per Dan, what you're saying, like the last session, it's like, well, that means we should be stripping those out. Thus, now I have something I can't express anymore. So we have a post cataloging step where we say it's a compliance checker. Like if we raise up things that have no versions, we could either drop the package, or we could say unknown, or stub it with something else. And it sounds like in these cases, maybe we would do that. We would say no assertion, or we would say range, and then we could encode this kind of information on the edge. So and I've got more questions there, but like that would at least be a spot to maybe put this.
Do we?
Yeah, I
So
do.
it's not.
Oh,
Go ahead, Dan.
I was gonna say, I do think it's, like, if the range information were encoded separate from the version, I absolutely agree that the choice of how the version field will be populated in the presence of a range but not a specific version, I think is a really important area. But it might be able to be reused, because if we put some time into thinking about how flexible to make that logic, then it could be reused to handle things like if you do get an SPDX document with a caret 5.0 in the version, it's possible to reuse the methodology that we come up with to choose, given a range, what do you put into the version field, to also choose how to handle that case if the SBOM comes in from stuff that's not generated by Syft.
Yeah,
I think it's nuanced.
that's tricky.
It's very tricky, but I think it's an interesting way to perhaps think about, like, well, how complex does that thing need to be?
Well, one thing, if we did have things encoded at the edge, one thing we could do, again, with probably necessary knowledge of the ecosystem, would be, get informed from multiple version ranges, because, like, again, there could be a number of things including the same package, but in that particular ecosystem, it gets resolved through a single thing. You can't have duplicates. And so we know it has to pick one that's compatible with all of the constraints that are there. So that would be something that would help us get better, but, it's still, there would be the question, like, you could have options to maybe pick the highest range or the lowest range or something else.
So it sounds like you're imagining, like, I don't know, there's more than one package that says it needs some package, right? And they constrain the version range. I think we can never get down to one, because most version systems are like floats, not ints, right? You can always put like +2 on the end, and then if you don't like that one, you can always put +2 on the end, right? Like, you can never, because we don't, like, Syft doesn't have a list of all the real versions, and so we can, like, narrow a range, but we can never further a range that a range has any specific number of packages in it.
Yeah,
I think that gets, yeah.
It's like subtly worse than that. I actually think you can only determine a fictitious minimum, and you can't infer anything else unless you have what you're saying, a universe of package.
Right. You might have an explicit maximum, right? Somebody could put less than 2.0 in there, in the package JSON, and we have a maximum, right?
We don't actually, because I think it's what you first said, right? Is it 1.9 or the 1.99 or the 1.99? Like it.
I see. Well, we know it's less than, right? We don't. You're right. We don't have a maximum, but we have a ceiling or something, right? We have a number we know it's less than. So I think all we can do is, like, constrain an infinitely subdivisable range. I think it's really dangerous to try to get in the business of of version resolution, because every language ecosystem has its own, like, sort of requirements solver, and some of them are pretty complicated, and all of them are a little different. So yeah, it's really interesting.
I mean,
Be a fun change in a version package in Grype. Go ahead, Alex.
No, I mean, I definitely like the idea of putting it on the edge, because you can, in theory, you could have one node. So if I want to talk through it from, like, the Syft perspective, Syft raises up a package with, either there's no assertion for the version or it puts range for the version, and then I would have, in theory, a node that represents one or more versions of a package. If I find any other requirements TXTs sitting around, or if there's other requirements, and they have also like loose ranges, I could, point those edges to the same node in theory. Like I'm going to hand wave at some of the specifics. It could be that we raise up that package multiple times because it's found in multiple places. In which case, we're always going to have many nodes as opposed to like one that has many edges. So, maybe not perfect there, but in theory, you could have like a single node with multiple edges going to a different range constraints, like you're saying, Keith. We'd always fill it in later, like you're saying, Dan. But I kind of get a little stuck at in the Syft JSON. I kind of know what to do. We have an extra data payload we can put on edges, and that's very wide, and we can kind of put anything on it we want. And so we could put something like a range constraint. For Cyclone, you can put it in the comments field. Sorry, SPDX, you can put it in the comments field. For Cyclone, is there a way to do this in Cyclone?
I don't believe so. I'm looking right now.
So,
Really
quickly, SPX3 does have properties that you can add to the edges. So SPX3 would support it, but 2 is what you said is a comment.
Yeah. Well, I guess the thing I'm trying to point out is that like we have an answer for Syft JSON, we have an answer for SPX, both 2 and 3, and Cyclone is, we don't have an answer for both, like say overloading the version field to represent ranges, which we don't want to do anyway. We don't have an answer for the edges. So I definitely don't know what to do for Cyclone. Like properties is the best I got, which is not ideal, but I guess we do the trick. So
on the edges, I'm just trying to imagine, like, let's just take a very simple case where we have a requirements TXT that says it wants requests greater than 3. So then we make a PyPy package called requests with a version, no assertion, and then we make a relationship. Is that what we mean by the edges?
Yeah.
And then the relationship is between wherever we found the requirements TXT, right? So we found the requirements TXT. Do we raise up a PyPy package that means like the app that has a requirements TXT today?
That's a good question.
I don't think we do. I don't think we have both sides of most of these edges is the problem with putting it on the edge. I think that it's possible that we either don't have enough information to put the dependency, right? We basically just have a name and a very vague version range, or we don't have anything to hang it off of, right? And that's actually, I don't know, that's like its other problem is like the main module, like your app, right? Like if you scan your app with Grype, there'll be packages that represent all the dependencies, but there won't necessarily be a package that represents your app.
I think that's a big problem with a lot of the catalogers. I was just noticing that doing some work this week.
But I mean, we don't have I agree with you. Sorry, go ahead, Keith. Go ahead.
I mean, yeah, so some of the things we do, they do have information. A lot of things we're reading a lock file, and that doesn't have, that's only dependencies. But, I suspect, especially if you're doing a source scan, at the very least, we have, let's say, some Git checkout information. And I think we've talked about like using that in the past, but yeah, that still doesn't necessarily, solve the problem of like, really, what is your app? Like what is the thing you're scanning? But I think it's important, and I think it's something we should, try our best to figure out. I don't know exactly how we can in all cases, obviously, but it does seem like a missing piece in a lot of spots to me.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think you put it in 2 buckets. One bucket is there's another file that is like a sibling to that one that describes a thing of the package. So sometimes it's like a Py project that, .yaml. Sometimes it's a, for node packages.json or package.json. but the other bucket is there's not anything. And actually this requirements.txt goes into that bucket too. Like I could just have a directory of requirements.txt. That's it. There's nothing declared about this even really being a package. It's just a directory with Python scripts that need things. And so there's not even the requirement for there to even be a package that requires such things. So it's, yeah, that is a problem putting on the edge, is that we're presuming there even could be like the left side of this relationship when sometimes there's not. So let's say we updated all of the catalogers to be as accurate as possible to get the left side of the relationship, like get the application node represented really well. I still think we would not be able to represent all.
Well,
of these
yeah.
cases.
I mean, that's presuming that we're doing package to package relationships on all of them. I mean, at the very least, we have a file, right? So like there could be something that has that information. I'm not saying we should do that, but I think there always would be something that we could use to make relationships.
Yeah, like point it to the source, point it to a file. I think a file to package relationship is probably our best bet hand way to sum that. But like I guess Dan, you found something on the component here.
Oh,
Looks like the component supports version and version range.
yep, sorry, I was muted. It looks like you'd mentioned, Keith, SPDX had some range capabilities when the component was external. It looks like Cyclone at least 1.7. I'm not sure about 1.6, but you can only use version range if it is external is true, but there is some precedence here, yeah.
What does is external mean?
Yeah, it's right here. It's not part of an assembly, but it's expected to be provided by the environment, which doesn't really track with what we're talking about.
Well, I think that could work. Like, let's say I have a requirements.txt that says requests greater than 3, right? That means my app doesn't run unless somebody pip installs requests at a version greater than 3, which sounds external to me, right? So I think in that case, we could make a component that says, I agree that it probably means dynamic linking, but if we're scanning a source checkout, like thing the package manager didn't resolve and pin down yet is a lot like dynamic linking. I don't know, how does that sound to other people? It's like we say it is external and we put a version range and we say like, right, well, basically what we're saying is a correct package manager will install requests greater than 3 from PyPy when building this thing.
Yeah, that's tricky. I want to say the set of ecosystems partitions well into what you're saying. Like in other words, like the is external happens to align for cases when we're describing something that is like separable, is not part of like a single binary blob at that point in time. Like in other words, if we had a binary and we're scanning it, we would have the point version, and this isn't an
right. And I think that's why the spec only allows a version range if it's external, right?
Well,
like if the go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
Yeah, I think is external is not so much about like dynamic loading of libraries into an application as it is about the environment outside of the application. Like this application requires Python 3.12. That might not, well, I guess that's a bad example because you can put that in requirements.txt, but it's not a library that's loaded into the program. It's like, you could say something like that for Node.js or OpenJDK, those kind of like, your environment needs to have this software in order for the application to run at this range of versions. I think that's what it's meant to. Doesn't mean it can't be overloaded to describe what we're talking about, but.
Well, and I think that makes a lot of sense for having a version range too, right? Right at the top of my project at TOML, you say I need Python greater than or equal to 3.11. Like, there's no Python interpreter in there, right? It's just so yeah, that makes sense. So then we have an is external package with a version range. It doesn't seem terrible to me. We probably have to end up adding at least version range. That suggests that like the least friction way with Cyclone DX is to add a version range optional field to Syft packages.
Well, I do think that, so we would, well, I think it makes sense to add somewhere on the package. And I'm gonna, like, whether that be a field on the package itself, and I mean, sorry, like the Go type. So like the Go type for package could have version range on it, or the metadata itself can implement an interface whenever there is a version range can be expressed. And so much like the file owners interface, we'd have one that's like a version range. We can get stuff out of that. I feel like something like that kind of makes sense in order to inform how we like output it in its final state. In other words, what like it might not be the catalogers that emit a relationship with the package. I think that might be a little too like restricting. It might be better for us to say like, hey, evidence can raise up, you know, knowledge of a package with an unknown version, but it has a range, and then later we can say, oh, and that's associated with, etc. And so that allows us to do a couple of things like so in Cyclone 1.7, when we can put it on a field, we can just very easily grab it from that object. But 2, if we don't, we can always extrapolate a relationship from the fields that are on the package, or the behavior that's on the package, in order to create that relationship just in time. And I think and there's a bit of hand waving on us to relationship to what? I think that's gonna be a problem. But yeah, sorry, in short, I think adding a field on the package makes sense, and then we don't actually have to express it in JSON. Because again, we'll probably have other ways to express this, such as relationship.
It is interesting. It does look like there is some precedence for this. I'm just like exploring the Cyclone question a little bit more, searching around a bit. And there, I've narrowed it to like, source code SBOMs, because this is absolutely a thing with source code SBOM generation. It has to be, right? Because so many of the ecosystems will specify range. And there is some precedence and some discussions about doing exactly what we just said. They're marked as external, that uses the version range. That's how you do this in Cyclone. And there's also an interesting precedence that I found. Cyclone DX Go mod generate SBOM actually makes a decision where it will typically choose the latest version matching the specified range as the version. So there's also probably some dynamic decisions there depending on your ecosystem and tooling. I don't know if that helps us, but there's been some decisions and discussions around this and other tooling.
I wonder how that overlaps with like MVS, because like Golang, the internal version selection algorithm is called minimum version selection, I think. And so MVS, and so like if you were to choose the highest available in the world, then you're probably not going to be accurate to what's really happening in the application. Anyway.
Well, and that's going to be depend on the package manager. I mean, we can probably even find cases where within a language, like different Python package managers are going to make a different set of dependencies based on the same PyProject HOML or requirements TXT or whatever. I wanted to talk about for a second. It sounds like we have like a tiny like pre-version of this feature where you can tell the Python cataloger that if it finds a range, to assume that the lowest legal version is installed. And we don't just want to copy that over to JavaScript and other catalogers. And I just wanted to talk a little bit. Yeah. And so the reason it doesn't feel right is because we sort of could be wrong and we don't do anything with the upper range. And it's also possible to write a version constraint that just doesn't correspond with reality, right? And yeah, and or the version that's actually going to be resolved is like very different from the range. You say greater than 1 and you get version 17 because that's just what happens, right? 17 is greater than 1. Nobody broke the rules. Um, so yeah, okay, that makes sense that we don't want to go that route. Um, yeah, this is an interesting feature. The Grype.
I might, yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was thinking we might want to bring the discussion in for a landing in this session. It sounds like we've chewed on it quite a bit. I'm not sure if we got to the point, Alex, where the needs discussion characteristic. I mean, we've definitely discussed it, but it sounds like we probably need to think a bit more about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's in need of a specific proposal. I think we've come up with I'm actually surprised that a lot of what we said is not like mutually exclusive. Like we basically have some answers for SPX and Cyclone for various versions. I think we're all head nodding at a couple of the philosophies, like don't overload the version field. This is its own thing.
Yeah.
I think TBD, there's probably a need for a proposal for like and where does the actual information live and how will that work in the architecture of Syft? So I think like the biggest outstanding question, just to kind of bring it to a close, is, well, does the cataloger itself make the decision about if it were to express this as a relationship? Does the specific cataloger parser function that's raising up the package, like that's parse the requirements txt, for instance, does it make the decision of raising up the relationship, or does it like cop out and say it's an element on the package itself internally, and then maybe later if we make relationships that's determined? Or like, I think that's the part that we can talk through on the issues. It's that the like lower level, like architecturally, how will that work? But I think from an ontology point of view, we're all head nodding. Tell me if I'm lying, anybody. On the edge makes sense for a lot of reasons. And in cases where it doesn't work or where the ecosystem has an answer, we defer to that. So Cyclone DX17 has an answer, so we're going to use that. But like Cyclone 1.6, we're not going to try to make it work. I think it would just be like, okay, they don't have an answer for this. We're not going to break this back.
I think one thing we haven't talked about that I think is pretty important is when, sort of relatedly, like when does this turn on and how do we deduplicate? Like I have a requirements txt that says requests greater than 3, and then I also have like a site packages with a like wheel of requests 3.2.7. Like I shouldn't raise both of those up, right? I should just respect the wheel or whatever, right? And I think it depends. So my initial thought was that like the declared dependencies catalogers can do this, but the installed catalogers can't. Sort of like the general philosophy of like, if you're scanning a source code repo, you can raise up ranges, but if you're scanning like a built image, you probably have specific versions, right? And so that was
if an RPM is telling me a range, something's wrong. Agreed. So yeah, I mean, I probably ought to close for this topic, I guess, unless anybody's got anything else.
Yeah, I think needs discussion is probably still the right label for this one. Maybe needs investigation too. I feel like there's some sleuthing to be done. But okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll update the labels.
Okay.
I'll have some notes.
Very interesting topic for sure. I mean, that was a good one to chew on. I kind of wanted to close that one with just a quick shout out. I found this while we were having the discussion from Andrew Nesbitt of ecosystem.ms fame. Yeah, he's done an enumeration of all of the open source versioning schemes with a GitHub project to try to keep track where people can make PRs if they find a new one. I just thought that was a very interesting resource.
I've gone to this list multiple times. It is
Yeah.
a great list.
Yeah, it is, and it's really nice that this is a place where you can try to keep this information up to date via PRs against the ecosystem. So yeah, okay.
It makes me just want to like dream up my own versioning scheme that doesn't exist and like PR it in here. I won't.
Integers, right? You just like every time you make a build, it's just one number higher. That's it. It's easy to sort. It's easy to tell if there's something between the ranges. Like that's the version scheme. It doesn't have any information in it, but it's easy for us.
Oh, my favorite fictional, our fictitious versioning scheme is like the Marklar versioning scheme. It's just like the shrug emoji. Like, what's your version scheme? It's literally just a shrug emoji. Like, you make a new version, it's the same one
every time.
That's all it's gonna be. Yeah.
It evaluates true for equals, greater than, less than, greater than, equal, and less than.
Yep. It's always a pre-release. It's always not.
Yeah, nice discussion. Very interesting topic. Let's jump over to, we've got about 15-20 minutes. Let's jump over to our needs discussion issues.
Yeah, I think that top one will be pretty short if I want to try that one. Someone proposed respecting git ignore when Syft is scanning a directory, which seems very reasonable, but I'm not sure we should do it by default because we are trying to make a manifest of everything in the file system. And I think it would be surprising, given that we have never respected git ignore or Docker ignore in the past, if we suddenly started to. So I'm sort of in camp off by default. Like you can tell Syft that it wants to respect git ignore, and we should probably also have an option for Docker ignore for completeness.
I think this. Okay, I have a suggestion.
Okay.
All right, so Keith alluded to this in the last conversation we had. I think it was the last conversation. It was, we have always wanted to add a few extra sources. So today we have a source for, source meaning like, we scan container images, we scan files, we scan directories. Those are all, we consider the source targets that we are able to scan and understand. And we've always wanted to add one that's just Git. And whether that be remote or local, but like you would be able to like just nicely understand and capture like your kind of current state, like, oh yes, I'm scanning the directory I was given has a .git directory. So I'm going to capture things like the commit, if there's a tag at where the head is, I'm going to capture that, like that kind of stuff. Capture that as like the elevated source object. So like when you're seeing what things are related to, it's related to this top level source thing. And that is now specifically not just a directory, it's Git. I feel like if we're in that particular mode where we either A, detected that we're scanning a directory that is a Git repo, or B, we've been explicitly told via like -- from Git, then we should probably enter this mode of honor the Git ignore. But if we've been told explicitly to do a directory scan like dir, like -- from dir, or we just automatically detected this is a directory, and then in some nested subdirectory there's a Git ignore, like we're not going to honor that, I guess, because we're not in a Git repo that we know of. So I'm trying to say this, I think this pairs well with introducing the idea of the Git source. Because there's a path forward without like it being quote unquote breaking or bringing a new feature that brings in this new behavior. And it won't break folks that are doing a directory scan. And like, unless you're in a directory that is a Git repo, but again, that's a new feature now. So that's not like it. Yeah. It's a little different.
Right. And so I think that, okay, so did I tell this person, because this person wanted to start working on it, and I thought the only thing really left to discuss was whether we respect, was whether it's default opt-in or default opt-out. So they are probably working on this as we speak, based on me telling them the wrong thing, based on what you just said. So let's figure out what we should tell them instead.
Well, I don't know if they would be interested in like, it's like the thing I just said is like a totally different scope of work. So I don't want to
Right.
assume that they would be interested immediately
And-
in like, oh, good, I'll go work on like making Git a first class citizen as a source and Syft. If they do,
Yeah.
that's we should definitely tell them the option like, hey, I think this would pair well with this. If
Yeah.
they don't want to go that path, I think my next question is, how would we have asked people to make this opt-in? Like, what was the way that we were going to say that we were suggesting that this is opt-in on this branch?
I was just saying, like, basically, like, if you're scanning a directory and there's a git ignore, like, pretend those were passed to exclude. And then just whether that feature is on by default was what I thought we would be discussing today, which is why I thought it would be a short issue.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there might be a path where they can add this one feature and then we can wire that up to the greater feature of the Git source. But I'm saying that without full clarity here.
Right. Well, and I think go ahead.
Yeah, just one thing about, like, I think we should be careful about making things sources, what that means. I mean, the Git directory is a good example of, I might do a scan and I have a bunch of different Git directories, and I still want to treat all of them as Git repos, get the information, surface that as packages. But if the only way to do that is because it's a source, it complicates things in terms of how we have to process it.
It almost sounds like the Git is like another metadata cataloger, like the file metadata cataloger, right? So if the Git metadata cataloger is on, then every time we find .git, we're like, are we at a tag? Are we at a branch? Are we at, you could have like metadata about that state, because to Keith's point, there can be, if you're scanning a file system, you can have .git anywhere you want. And so, but I think the source makes a lot of sense too. Like, I've had people ask for, like, can I do Syft, like, github.com/my.org/my app, which I think would be a really cool feature.
Yeah, like,
so
a remote directory essentially, and it goes and does a git clone and then like does a directory scan on there. That would be awesome, like, as a git source. But the actual processing of the git files seems to me to be, just like you said, Will, it's something that we detect a git directory, because, like, think, for example, you have a git directory with submodules. Well, you want to surface all of those, and so, like, the top level is going to have a git. You're going to have some information about the submodules when you get into those directories, and you want those probably surfaced in a consistent way. So, like, I think that, yeah, I think it's like, it's something we should be able to, like, do regardless of the source we're using.
I'm torn. Like for like the submodule example, for instance, like in theory that, because there's the Git, I think it's the either Git modules or Git attributes file that's sibling of the .git directory. So therefore, like, that would kind of come with the source, without having to like discover it recursively per se. But I also don't think these are mutually exclusive. I think that we could definitely have in the caveat in the file section, whenever we come across a path that has, that is .git, that has this metadata, we can capture it there, just like what we do with executables, right? Like, we find this path is an executable, so we have an executable section there. We could go that direction. The one caveat I'm going to say there is that the file section is for files, not directories. We don't capture directories there, they capture files there. I think there are exceptions, and maybe this can be one of those exceptions. So, like, it's not like a hard blocker, but it's just like one little thing there. So, like, Will or somebody's about to say something.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, yeah, this can to me kind of rhymes with the previous discussion a little bit, where it was like we sort of answer the question like, what's in this file system, more than we answer the question, what is this file system? Right, and the like, right, like if we find a requirements.txt, we're not necessarily going to find the Django app that occasioned the requirements.txt. We're going to find all the dependencies in it. And the Git repo, like you scan a directory and there's a .git in it, kind of reminds me of that situation where like the Git is about tracking sort of what the thing is in some ways. The other thing I was going to say is it's possible like there is a .git modules, but you can also just have I've actually done this, so I know it works. You can git ignore a directory and then git init init in that directory and just nest. And then there's two totally independent Git repositories that are inside each other from the file system's perspective, but not from Git's perspective. Which is actually really useful. So like if you're like working on Funnel and you have a million scripts that are like different hypotheses about how you parse Red Hat CSAF, and they're getting complicated enough, you want version control on them, you can make a temp directory in Funnel and git ignore it, and then CD into it and in a Git repository to keep track of all your silly experiments that are like scoped to that one workspace. I actually really like this feature.
I now feel just a little more guilty that you worked on CSAF for that long. Because it's no longer hypothetical for you.
Yeah, just for example.
But yeah. So anyway, I think that the Git source is a really cool idea. But we at least have to consider the possibility that a directory scan, even if there's .git in the root of what we're asked to scan, we're going to find more .git, even if it's not submodules. That's sort of the point.
And I think going back, Will, your question was like, what do we tell Resmos here about this particular thing? Would a simple solution be to add like an exclude file option or something? So instead of having to like specify each individual excludes, you could just say exclude file, .git ignore */git ignore, or something that if it finds
right.
So just treat them as lists of excludes or something along those lines.
That's true. So basically a shorthand for passing -- exclude followed by all the globs and git ignore.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a great idea, because I think I'd be pretty I think would be like -- excludes file is great, and I think the git ignore syntax is how we want our excludes file to work, if only because everybody already knows that and Dr. Ignore uses it, and I'm sure like ESLint ignore or whatever also uses it or can use it. So yeah, I think the -- excludes file is a good way of making this opt-in without and sort of the core of it, which is the like glob handling, can just be passed to however we exclude directories today.
Right. I think like the exclude does take globs, so I think it would almost be like a line for the file.
And I think you can say like A, but then not A/B in git ignore. So there's a little complexity, but that maybe our excludes already handles that.
That would be complexity that this contributor would be tackling anyway, right, for this PR.
Right. I think
so I really like, for what it's worth, I really like the idea of, adding this as a general excludes from file or whatever using this format, because that's also not incompatible with what Alex, you were saying earlier, which is adding a new type of source and taking it into account. It's generally applicable. I really like that suggestion.
Yeah, I really like that too. That's a great solution.
Yeah, the problem with what I was saying was that like, here's this giant extra scope that we can add. So we needed something in between. This is the right in between. So Definitely that's the answer. Everything that we were talking about for the get source can be later.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. I might put needs discussion on before I go and tell a contributor that I should build something next time. But it sounds like we have a good day. The core of the work here is to build or find a Golang implementation that like checks whether paths are getting ignored and wired up to Syft.
Yeah.
And this is just arg parsing differences basically. So all right, I can comment back to this person and
Nice.
explain what we talked about. Thanks. Those
Yeah.
are really good idea. I appreciate it.
So this is like the indexer. Like, is this something that the indexer, like, so we exclude these things from the index, from the file resolver point of view? Yeah, okay. Because I just made a realization that like it's different from exclude in the sense that like you can't just take all the lines from the exclude file and like kind of add it to the exclude list. It really is like as I run across files, I'm about to add it to the index. When we're first starting up Syft, we need to say, oh, is this path? Does it match all these rules in the exclude file? Yes, or no, keep it. Yes, exclude it. So it'd be something like that. So we're talking, this is a filter for the when building the index, essentially.
Yeah, I think.
Well,
I think.
I mean, from an implementation standpoint, like yes, it could be that. But also, I think it literally could just be split the lines, like split the file on lines, add each of those to an exclude.
To opt exclude, yeah.
Because
I don't think that'll work.
But those are globs, like those are all file globs that they.
No, because like, so for Git, you can say that, so the lines aren't independent. The lines are dependent based, so you can have like not something in the Git ignore, and that's relative to previous lines. I mean, I'm not getting
and there's comments and stuff. So I think what the person needs to do is like figure out the get ignore syntax and sort of collapse it. Do we have like do we have an excludes not operation? Because if we don't, we're blocked. Right? Because if I say excludes data, does not exclude data tools, which you can totally do in get ignore, then
but that's what I'm saying. I think this turns into a exclude function.
Yeah.
Like it's.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to say. Like this is a function that's applied to the index. Yeah. So like the exclude file, like it would say, oh, this is a get ignore file. So this turns into a function that like it's interpreting for every file that we like walk across that are added to the index. It gets resolved via that function, so it can take into consideration those multiple lines. And then I think we can support anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's still work that would have to have been done as part of this PR, even in its current form, right? So it still falls into that like useful functionality to add category.
Yeah, and I still think the right user experience is -- excludes file equals dot get ignore. Does anybody feel like that's not quite the right user experience? I said this would be fast, and it took the whole rest of the meeting. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. No, yeah.
The question I have is the way get ignore works is you can have nested files all the way along the file system. So if somebody wants to get ignore, do they have to specify a glob to find them all, and then we have to like search for all of them and do like partial tree exclusions the same way that Git works?
I think it'd be surprising if it didn't work the way that Git worked. So in other words, like I think we should always behave like how Git is.
I think what we do is we have a like mode or something for exclude. So you do -- exclude equals Git. And then Syft builds its index from running Git ls files instead of building its index from any other way, right? Git already does this. We need like a Golang libgit, I think, because I don't know, that feels like the right way to do it to me is just to ask, like, Git already very carefully has these rules. Oh, we can't link to libgit because Cgo. This is a harder feature than it looks like.
let's just remove that
Just-
issue label.
Yeah, I'm gonna go remove that.
I think
There's
we're
definitely
close.
some discussion here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we're
Like,
close.
there's, yeah, I unfortunately suspect it's not going to be as simple as the exclude file, like their exact suggestion. I think it's probably going to be in that same vein. But it might be genericized. Like it might be we say, like,
Yeah.
I don't know what the right verbiage here, but like, if there's an extra config value, it's like, exclude behavior, get ignore. So they're not specifying paths. They're just saying, hey, please honor get ignore. You could add things like Docker ignores, et cetera, that files. And there could be some complicated logic that needs to occur for any of those. But like, we're basically saying, I'm opting into get ignores. You don't have to think about paths.
Right, yeah, and I think the excludes file is a cool feature on its own, but it's like a list of blobs we should skip, line separated. And that's not exactly the same thing as a get ignore file.
Yeah, because if we do this in a simple way, like it get implemented, we merge it, and then someone's gonna write an issue anyway saying, hey, I have a get ignore with a not in it. It like totally didn't do the right thing. So that's why I'm like,
Yeah.
exclude file is a cool thing. You should probably do that anyway. But it sounds like we're talking about another thing.
Okay, so I will write to this user and say, we discussed the issue in the live stream. You can watch it for ideas, but we didn't come up with a simple implementation that will be equivalent to what Git does.
Yeah, it's a good way to orient the discussion. Let's talk about like processing a .get ignore and then how to map that onto the internal functions of Syft. Yeah, nice. We are a little over time. We're I want to make that note. But is there anything else we want to chat about to sort of make sure we've got a good next action on this one? Sounds like Will, you're going to respond and keep the conversation going. Yeah. Maybe even link to this discussion, like
Yeah. Oh yeah. I will link to the discourse thread where we post about this particular episode of the live stream, so they can find the YouTube and discourse comments and stuff.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'll try to give a quick summary. And cool, that was good discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else to wrap up for today, other than to wish everyone who's observing Halloween a happy Halloween?
More candy, yes.
Sounds good. Excellent. Well, thank you everybody, as always, for joining. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Will. Thanks, Alex. We'll see everyone online.
Take care.
All right.
See you folks.
Bye.